Kate, there are hundreds of migrants here on the streets of El Paso. I'm going to walk around the block just to show you the magnitude, but let's pan over here to the side and then we're going to walk around the block and you'll see that there are hundreds of migrants that are sleeping on the streets here of El Paso. Let's walk with me as I tell you the story here, because you'll see that there are lines here for everything, for water, for food. And like you said, El Paso is in a state of emergency right now. Officials are very concerned about public safety, about shelter, as you can see, and also about transportation, because there's only a limited amount of seats to exit the city of El Paso, and that creates a bottleneck. That's why the city of El Paso issued a disaster declaration to make sure that they can ease up some of those resources. Now, you can see we just made the turn here. Take a look behind me, and you'll see that there's an entire block that is just packed with migrants. All of these migrants were sleeping on the street here. I can tell you, Kate, from talking to the priest from this church, he says he has never seen anything like this, saying that this is a crisis. Now, process this with me, because Title 42 allows immigration agents to swiftly return certain migrants back to Mexico. So the obvious question is, why are we seeing so many migrants right now if Title 42 is in place? Well, here's what we know from talking to migrants, officials on both sides of the border, and community leaders on both sides of the border. They say that at least in 4 northern Mexican cities, there are nearly 40,000 migrants waiting for the lifting of Title 42, which is scheduled for May 11th, excuse me. But they are getting impatient. From talking to some of the migrants here, some of them, they say, they have grown impatient and they decided to cross the border. Now, here's the key. Some of them crossed by turning themselves into border authorities. Others decided to enter the country illegally, which takes me to my final point, Kate. That's the other reason why it's very difficult for the city of El Paso and city of El Paso officials, because the FEMA money that they get to help migrants is for those migrants who have been processed by immigration authorities, because that's what FEMA monies allow them to do. A lot of these individuals here, if they enter the country illegally, the city just can't help them. Kate?
What you've described very well and in very vivid detail is just what a mess is on their hands at the border and is at the feet of the federal government right now.
Rosa, tell us what you're seeing.
You know, the news flash for the Biden administration is that even though they're waiting for May 11th, the surge is here, John. Let me show you around. Right now, what's going on is a cleanup operation by the city of El Paso. This is what is allowed under the state of emergency that was declared by officials. They have a sanitary team come through the streets and clean twice a day. Of course, public health is a huge concern. Public safety is a big concern. Walk with me and I'll show you. The only reason why you don't see migrants here is because literally they are cleaning the streets as we speak to make sure that there is no spread of disease. But as we turn the corner, you'll be able to see an increased police presence and also an increased number of migrants. If you look around, you'll notice that there's a lot of adults, a lot of single adults. You're not seeing a lot of the families. Why? Because the shelters, and there's a network of shelters here in El Paso, there are shelters who are housing the women with children, the families with children. That's why you see a lot of single adults that are out on the streets lingering. Now, earlier this morning, all of these individuals were sleeping on the streets. And of course, I've talked to some of them. Many of them are worried because they can't leave El Paso. Why is that? One of the reasons is many of them don't have sponsors or family members in the United States that they can go to. Sometimes what happens is family members change their mind. They say, okay, join me in Miami, join me in Chicago. And John, those family members change their mind. They say, no, don't come to my house anymore. And so that's why a lot of the times you see migrants here. But the news flash for the Biden administration is if they were waiting for the surge on May 11th, the surge is here, the surge is now. John.
The surge is now, and one would expect it would get only more intense as that approaches. Rosa Flores, grateful you're on the ground for us in El Paso.
This is also an issue that, yes, it's driven by policy, but it's also driven by optics. And when you see images like that repeatedly on the screen, that's something that people will be using against the president as this debate plays out.
And you see the images Rosa's showing you in El Paso. You see it at other places along the border as well, where there are thousands of migrants camped just on the other side of the border. Rosa's on the United States side of the border. The big city mayors across the United States criticizing the governor of Texas, previous to that criticizing the governor of Florida, but Texas at the moment for busing migrants to Chicago, to New York City. Governor Greg Abbott saying he's not going to stop in a letter yesterday to the Lori Lightfoot, the Chicago mayor, to provide much needed relief for our overrun border communities. Texas began busing migrants to sanctuary cities such as your welcoming city, along with Washington, New York City, Philadelphia, with more to come. Until Biden secures the border to stop the inflow of mass migration, Texas will continue its necessary program. So again, the political divide is giant, and everybody's pointing fingers at each other.
How's the city of El Paso preparing for this expected surge?
You know, let me show you around so you can see, Anderson, because this city is under a disaster declaration, and you can see that there are hundreds of migrants that are on the streets here. And what the city is doing is they're providing porta potties, hand wash stations, and also they come out and clean out these streets every single day, because one of their biggest concerns, of course, is public health and also public safety. Now, one of the things that they point out is that there are a lot of individuals who are out on the street, and you're wondering, well, why doesn't this disaster declaration, which usually frees up monies, help these individuals who need shelter? Well, here's the answer. FEMA money only allows the city of El Paso to help individuals who have turned themselves into border authorities and have been processed in some sort of way. The problem, Anderson, is that a lot of the individuals here got frustrated in Mexico and crossed into the country illegally, and the city really can't help them.
And Title 42 is still in effect right now. Can you just explain why there's so many migrants on the street?
You know, that's a great question, because Title 42 allows immigration agents to swiftly return migrants back to Mexico. So you're exactly right. So then why are we seeing all these migrants here when immigration agents have the power to return them back? From talking to migrants on both sides of the border and officials on both sides of the border, I can tell you that there's tens of thousands of migrants that are just like this, but on the Mexican side of the border, and they are frustrated. And so what has happened, Anderson, is they are frustrated, they got impatient, and they decided to cross the border illegally. And so that's why a lot of them are ending up in cities like El Paso. El Paso is not the only city that has declared a disaster. Also, Brownsville, Texas has done the same because they're seeing a huge influx.
And what's been the reaction to the administration's announcement of more troops on the border?
You know, walk with me and I'll show you more of what we are seeing here in the alley, because there are just hundreds of people here. You know, from talking to people in border cities for a really long time, Anderson, they're really tired of seeing a lot of the militarization of the border, whether it's troops or National Guard or any of that. I talked to one resident today who put it this way. He said, you know, they're really tired of Governor Abbott spending billions of taxpayer dollars to send troops to the border, to send more police officers to the border. They're also tired with the Biden administration because they say that there really is and has been no solution. And the reason why I want to point this out here where I'm at is because this resident told me, look, the American people, the American taxpayer is paying billions of dollars. The Texas taxpayer is paying billions of dollars to secure the border. And what are you looking at around me? Hundreds of migrants who are still crossing the border, and that's their point. Sending troops, sending more police officers, those are Band-Aids. There needs to be a real solution, and Phil mentioned it. And a lot of people on the border feel the same way. There needs to be immigration reform. Congress needs to act for there to be a real solution.